or in the case of the African antelope, the Cape buffalo, and things, where sometimes the males have horns and the females don't, but often the males have bigger, more functional horns, and the females have smaller horns. Either they don't use or they use for a different purpose or context. And we're thinking that this was not the case with the dinosaurs, that Triceratops, male and female, both had big horns as far as we know. Pachycephalosaurs, male and female, as far as we know, both had big, thick domes on their heads. The duck-billed dinosaurs, Parasaurolophus, had the big hollow crests on their heads, male and female, as far as we know. We don't see a sexual dimorphism here. So why are they having these crests? And part of it, we think, is species recognition, actually, so they know who to hang out with. Who is in your species? Who do you hang with? Who do you consort with? Safety in numbers, protection from predators, migration together, possible candidates for mating when it becomes mating season, and so on. So in some ways, these features are like that. But the other factor about mammals and birds is that a lot of the things that we know that distinguish species, like in birds, the feathers or the songs, in mammals, the horns or the claws or the teeth or whatever it is, these things work between males to establish territories. And the interesting thing is that in the evolution of horns in mammals, at first the horns were short and sharp and used for stabbing, we think. So it was a clear weapon injury type thing. To settle a dispute, these things would go at each other and with the intent to inflict harm. Fatal harm? Maybe not necessarily, but the idea is, get out of here, it's my territory, and we're equipped to do this. But with many of the antelope on the African plains, the horns are bigger, they're spiral, they're curved. They're clearly not meant to do that. And a lot of these cases, they'll either use them in racking up against each other and wrestling with the horns, interlocking the horns and wrestling one or the other to the ground, or ramming, as in the case of sheep. But really, a lot of these things have become simply display items where one guy gets up, makes a big display of his horns, the other guy gets up, makes a big display of his horns, the smaller guy goes, okay, you got me. They eliminate this, and that's their conflict resolution.
They evolved from a system where conflict was resolved by violence and hurting each other to a system where it's just by avoidance of conflict.
Yes, at first in the antelopes, the African antelopes, the horns appear to have been short, sharp, poking, piercing devices. So they were resolving conflict basically by hurting each other, maybe not fatally, but certainly sending a message and wounding. Whereas later in their evolution, they evolved horns and horn systems that were more curved, more suited for ramming, wrestling, interlocking, and kind of twisting each other to the ground, or just simply big enough horns that said, look, I'm bigger than you are, don't mess with me. And the smaller guy would go, you're right, this is a waste of time. And that's good for the species because it means that there's less damage to the most viable males. Why should you have your number one male and your number two male have to, one or the other have to be taken out of circulation and the other maybe be severely damaged by this? That's not good for the population. So actually in populations where a system of more avoidance evolved was better for the species. And in fact, this is what we see in a lot of species. They don't have to go through a lot of nearly fight-to-the-death combat.
Well, it's interesting. I wonder if there's something of a parallel to that with international or even national domestic dispute resolution in different countries, where we see that, particularly in places where the cost of resolving disputes through the courts or through the litigation systems, whether it's arbitration or the courts, is so expensive that there's a tendency to move towards a conflict avoidance system, what we call alternative dispute resolution, where you can in fact show your horns and also bring out other potential interests that are not just I'm right, he's wrong, but there are other reasons for us to get along with each other and move past it. And I wonder if there's in our own social system a sort of a natural progression particularly where conflict is expensive. At least that's where I see it. Do you see that in nature where conflict is expensive? Is it fair to say there's a cost of conflict for organisms or for animals?
That's right. It's kind of like brinkmanship and settling in a court of law, where the cost of doing business is not greater than the cost of what it's going to cost both parties to actually to decide the issue and go on without paying a lot to figure this out. This makes perfect sense. When Darwin develops his concept of survival of the fittest, Darwin also developed the concept of sexual selection. So he knew a ton about all this stuff. And when you come right down to it, really avoiding conflict by figuring out who's going to win is better for not just the individuals involved, but for the whole species. If you have two males, as I said, who could presumably, one could be killed, the other could be severely injured, versus simply a display that says, okay, 1 and 2 are still going to carry on here, and they're going to win the day, and that's going to happen, and they'll each go off and procreate with others, and they'll pass on their genes, and that'll be better for the species.
Let me ask about a different type of conflict that I know that you've dealt with, and that is the controversy, or let's say the so-called controversy about birds and bird evolution and birds' association with dinosaurs. Because I read this a lot in newspapers, and that's where